Hey everyone, welcome. My name is Rob Phelan, also known as the Fi Educator Online, and today we are talking about bankruptcy. It's a topic that isn't really widely known amongst most personal finance teachers, students, adults in general, and we're bringing on an expert today to help us learn more about it. We're going to be joined by Adrienne Hines, who is a former bankruptcy attorney, has been in the business for 30 years, and has now devoted her career to helping others to learn about bankruptcy, how to navigate it, and how to avoid it, which I think is going to be a big thing for us, especially starting out in our personal finance journeys. We want to know, how do we not make the mistakes that others have made that have led to bankruptcy, and how can we best avoid it? Now, some situations are unavoidable, I would throw out there. Life does happen, and we want to make sure that we are not saying that this will never happen to you, or disregarding that, life does kick some people pretty hard and it can lead to bankruptcy. But we want to know, how do we avoid it, and then what happens if we do need to take that path. So I'm excited to welcome Adrienne on, who's going to share with us about her journey and all of her knowledge as well. Adrienne, welcome.
Thank you very much, Rob. Thank you for having me, and welcome to all of the students who are going to be watching this today. Let's get real for a moment, right? Like, how many of these people, how many of you guys woke up this morning thinking, you know what I need today? I need to talk about bankruptcy, right? Probably none of you. That's cool.
There's a huge show of hands right now.
Yeah, I'm sure there are. Probably no one. That I get it. I'm not offended. I know that it's not me that you're trying to avoid, but a bankruptcy is really important to understand as you're beginning to enter into the adult financial world, because what I've learned is there's a lot of adults who don't know what it is either. So let's talk about kind of what it is, and let me introduce myself first. I am Adrienne Hines. I'm a bankruptcy lawyer in Northwest Ohio, and I'm a bankruptcy lawyer. And that basically means that I help people who are drowning in debt. I help them stop the madness and get a fresh start. It's kind of like being the referee in a money game where nobody knows the rules, right? That's basically what I do as a bankruptcy lawyer. How did I get here? 4 years of college and 3 years of law school and a really, really long test. And I'm a bankruptcy lawyer, been practicing. This is my 28th year. I did pass the bar exam with a few points to spare, so yay me. That's for that small reason I'm here to practice. But I know what you guys are thinking, right? Like, debt, that's for adults. Newsflash, someday every single one of you is going to start buying things if you haven't already. And once you turn 18, everything you buy is your responsibility. Every contract you enter into, everything you do. It's important to learn what these things are before you get to that point, simply so that you understand how to avoid some pitfalls, right? And a lot of you guys live in families that are people who are struggling. And I do want you to hear that you're going to learn today that there's a lot of myths and misconceptions about bankruptcy. So I see you as shepherds going out into the world to help other people take away shame and embarrassment from the discussion of debt. And that's kind of what I do. So what is bankruptcy? I'm sure you're asking, right? Bankruptcy.
Yeah. Well, before you launch into it, I'm so sorry. Before you launch into it, if you are watching the replay, make sure you check out the student activity document that goes with this. You can find it using the link below me here. So that's the fieducator.com/bankruptcy. And if you're starting now, pause the video and fill out that first question that before we start, what do you know about bankruptcy? But as we go through this conversation, we're going to talk through some of the main points of bankruptcy, some of the big ideas in there, and there's spaces for you to fill that out. Plus, we're going to have a little trivia section too, which is a brand new feature on these videos. And Adrienne, I'm very interested to see how you compete against the kids.
Boy, that's a lot of pressure. I'm really bad at trivia. Oh, cold sweats are starting already, but I'm gonna
more like the price is right. It's gonna be like
okay, that's fair.
All right, so let's jump straight into it. The first thing we are going to ask is, like, what is bankruptcy? Because I remember watching a classic show, The Office, and one of the biggest misconceptions was, like, Michael, the main character, coming in and being like, what is bankruptcy?
I declare bankruptcy!
So is that how it works? Do we actually just walk into a room and declare bankruptcy?
No, it's not quite that easy, but it's not actually all that complicated either. Basically, bankruptcy is really essentially when somebody raises their hand and they say, hey, I'm broke. Like, I can't do this financial thing anymore. Can we call a timeout somehow on this debt thing? And there are very specific courts all around the United States. They're actually bankruptcy courts. So in every state in America, you have different types of courts. You're going to have courts where you go and get a divorce. You're going to have courts where you go for a traffic ticket. There are federal courts in every state, and every state has at least one or two federal jurisdictions, and there's going to be a bankruptcy court in those jurisdictions. So it's an actual courthouse that is in major cities that is designed just for this specific purpose. But it's where we go to stop the world from spinning so that people can figure out what their options are. When you get too far into debt, the biggest issue becomes how do we stop the world from spinning so we can figure out what to do? Because you constantly have expenses every day, right? And so figuring out how to reorganize those when you've fallen behind becomes really important. It's important to know that bankruptcy, much against a lot of the myths that most people think about, bankruptcy is not a punishment. Okay, I think a lot of people think bankruptcy is a punishment because you've shown yourself to be bad or ignorant or incapable, and that's not what bankruptcy is. People fall into hard times for a myriad of reasons, and bankruptcy is the way that we allow people to find their dignity and get themselves up off the ground that they've fallen onto and put themselves back up together and go back out into the world. People need a way to escape crushing debt. Businesses need to know that, how they're going to get repaid if they're going to get repaid. And we all need to understand how the system works, so that we can take control of the finances, right? There are 7 reasons why somebody would file for bankruptcy. So I want everybody to hear this. This is really the beginning of how we end up in a problem, right? Think about this: death of a spouse, right? If you have a spouse that passes away, you now have just one person and their income trying to maintain a household, and a lot of things happen from there, right? That person might have been the earner. You have a loss of a spouse. You have job loss. You have a divorce, right? Anytime we have a divorce situation, the money in the household, there's not as much money to go around as there was before. You have a major medical event, right? You diagnosed with leukemia at the age of 32, didn't see that one coming. Financial abuse. Anybody who is being abused physically or emotionally is probably being abused financially as well. We all know about those scams from Nigeria, right? People fall for those, and they get caught up in them. Businesses. Bankruptcy is really designed to help people be entrepreneurs and start businesses, but businesses fail, and America is really designed to allow you to fail and then get back up. We're a capitalistic society, so we want you to keep trying, right? We want you to just keep on trying. If you fall, let's get you back up because we need you to start making money and enter into the economy. I mean, think about this as an example. Let's say you borrow money from a friend to buy a concert ticket, right? And your phone breaks, and then your dog eats your homework, right? And a lot of things happen. Or maybe you owe your parents money because you broke something at home, and you now no longer have the money to pay your friend back. Bankruptcy is how we resolve these types of issues, okay? If you can't pay something you don't have. So we come together and figure out what the best option is for you. Did you know that our founding fathers thought that bankruptcy was so important that they wrote it into the Constitution? It's really important to know that the Constitution provides protections like these because America was really designed to be entrepreneurial and take risks, get in those covered wagons and go west. In order to have that attitude, we have to have a way to get out of our troubles, because a go get 'em attitude gets you into trouble. And we know that. And that's what we want people to do in this country. And that's why we provide an out for them.
So it's not like where you're Monopoly, you become bankrupt, like it's game over. Like, this is supposed to be that reset button, that way we figure out how do we overcome this. And is it just like counseling? Is it just like, okay, we're just going to figure this out? Or like, what actually is involved in the act of bankruptcy?
That's a great question. There are actually 2 types of bankruptcies that most regular individuals would file. Your parents, you and I, there's 2 types. The first is called a Chapter 7. A Chapter 7 is technically called a liquidation, all right? The second type of bankruptcy is called a Chapter 13. And a Chapter 13 is a reorganization, all right? So the difference between a Chapter 7 and a Chapter 13 are profound. And what we're talking about here is a legal process. It's not counseling. You actually fill out a legal document. You pay money to file it in bankruptcy court. You initiate a bankruptcy. You yourself make that step to do it. It's like you're suing somebody else, but you're essentially asking for the bankruptcy court to take care of you, to protect you. All right. So if you qualify to file a Chapter 7, you get to just get rid of certain types of debts. All right. And that's going to be credit cards and medical bills and personal loans and payday loans. They just go away. But in order to qualify for Chapter 7 bankruptcy, your household has to be below an income limit, right? So you have to be poor to file a Chapter 7, or you have to have a lot less money than your neighbor does to file a Chapter 7. The less money you have, the more opportunity you have to get rid of this very specific type of debt called unsecured general non-priority debt. That's going to be your credit cards, medical bills, personal loans, that type of stuff. If you do not meet the income category to qualify for a Chapter 7 bankruptcy, then your only option is to look at a Chapter 13 bankruptcy. And what that is that's going to start paying back your creditors some or all of what you owe based on what you can afford, right? So if you're a little over the number for your state, you're going to pay a little bit back. If you're a lot over the income limit for your state, you're going to pay a lot back. But at the end of 5 years in a Chapter 13, what you have not paid back just completely goes away. So you pay what you can afford for 5 years and the rest of it just goes away. And that's the credit cards, medical bills, personal loans, that type of stuff. It's very important to understand that is the most lowest level of debt in America. It's the most dangerous. It's the most predatory. It is the most risky. And then there's a reason why that specific debt goes away in bankruptcy. You don't get a free house or a free car in bankruptcy. Right? You don't get to get rid of your child support, your alimony, or usually your student loans or your taxes. Those things are priority. We're getting rid of the things that are non-priority and unsecured. And there's no protections. These creditors have taken no protection. They have not protected themselves at all. They're just throwing money at you and making money off of the interest that you pay. And that's what their business model is. And because it's such a dangerous business model, that's why bankruptcy exists.
Okay, so this would be different than say like, you owe a bunch of different people money, and like our classic advice would be, well, let's call up the people you owe money to. Let's say like, hey, I don't have what I need to pay you. Can we change the terms of the loan? Can we extend the term? Can we defer for a little bit? This is something different. This is where basically a court is saying like what you can afford to pay, and the people you owe money to just have to accept that.
That is correct. The people that you owe money to have to accept what your bankruptcy court judge finally rules as your responsibility in your case. If your income is under a certain limit, you probably don't have to pay back any of the credit cards or the medical bills or the personal loans if you're under a certain limit. When you are over a certain limit, we run formulas to determine, there's a federal formula that tells us what you should be able to afford to pay based on your household size and the people that are in it and the unique expenses to you, right? If you have if you have a handicapped sister who's living with you and that person has more expenses, we're going to increase the expenses for your household. But it's all an expenses based system. And so when we go through and run all of your expenses, if you have any money left over at the end of the month, right? That's why you have to go into a 13 to pay a little bit back. The problem with going to each one of your creditors individually is that, number one, there's no laws in America that require your creditors to accept less than what you owe without a court order. And so a debt consolidation company doesn't have that power. And if you're trying to do this yourself, it's a good thing to try to do initially. And I'll go through my theory on when you should look at bankruptcy here in a minute. But it's just, that's what you have to do. That is what you have to do. I have a very clear point of view. If you have $10,000 or more in that type of debt, that credit cards, medical bills, personal loans, and you or your family member or whomever cannot budget your own way out in 3 years or less without borrowing more money and without going to a debt settlement consolidation company, then you should be talking to a bankruptcy lawyer. And the reason I say that is because bankruptcy is the only safe way to manage debt after budgeting. People think that borrowing from a 401k or from a home equity line of credit or taking out a consolidation loan are good ideas. But when we're in trouble with debt, it's like having an alcoholic in the house, right? We don't give more of what they're struggling with. You don't need more debt if you've already got debt. And that's why consolidation loans tend to fail. If you're going to negotiate these debts on your own, you need to be able to negotiate them all at the same time. And one of the problems is a lot of people will piecemeal. I will deal with the guy coming at me, but I don't have a plan for all the other 5 who are out there. And you can squander your resources trying to deal with one at a time, right? So you have to have a big, clear plan, a big picture plan. And that's where we start.
All right. Well, I think that's a great outline of like when we would do it, why we would do it. Yeah. So we're going to pause here for a second. Let's try our trivia and we'll come back for part 2 of our talk. So today's trivia, today, if you didn't know it, is National Flossing Day. So that's going to be our topic for our trivia. Let's see what's going on. Okay, so on the back of your sheet, you have a space where you can take your guess. Now, there is a financial theme to this at the end. I will talk about the dollar amount afterwards. But how much flossing do you have to use a year? What do they use? Okay, so Adrienne, we'll come back to the answer to that at the very end of our presentation. We'll find out how you did compared to everyone else. But let's go into the next part, and that is some myths and misconceptions about it. And you already kind of hinted at this, that every debt can be tossed out or some debts can't be. Can you just clarify once again, like which debts can and cannot be tossed out? And then what other myths are we not addressing that we kind of the average person thinks of?
Yeah. So in my world, there's really 3 kinds of debt, right? The first type of debt, if you think of it as a pyramid, up at the top of the pyramid, the smallest piece of the pyramid there, that's going to be what I call general unsecured, priority debt. I'm sorry, guys, priority debt. Priority debt is going to be taxes, child support, alimony, student loans. Those are really important debts. They aren't going away in a bankruptcy. And you have to know in your mind that those are going to keep haunting you. Those are going to be there no matter what it is you try to do, and you need to be addressing them. That's the first type, is called priority. You don't get out from underpaying them. Taxes, child support, that type of stuff. The second type of debt, which is going to be in the middle of the pyramid, is secured debts. And this concept is a little difficult. I struggled with this in law school because I hadn't owned a home or a car yet by then. But a secured debt means that a mortgage is secured by the deed to the home. A car loan is a secured loan. If I lend you money to buy a car, I'm going to hold on to the title, right? That's called the security interest. So there's priority debts, there's secured debts, and then below secured debts is everything else. General unsecured non-priority debt. That's going to be all the things that aren't taxes or child support or super important. It's going to be all the things that are not, the lender isn't holding something, or the lender can't get the thing back from you. All right. It's going to be everything else. So that's going to be old Verizon contracts. You live in an apartment and you can't keep paying, and you skip out in the middle of the night and they chase you down and they sue you. Credit cards, medical bills, I've said it, payday loans. It's, you look at your credit report and you'll start to see all these little things that start to gather up on them over the years that you forget about. Those are all of the things that go away in bankruptcy. And it's usually a little bit at a time, right? We have a little bit of mess over here, and we go a little too far on this credit card over here. We're trying to keep up, and then something bad happens and we just cannot correct ourselves. So the types of debt that go away are very specifically credit cards, medical bills, personal loans. that type of stuff. You don't get a free car. You don't get a free house. You got to keep paying on those things if you want to keep them. You don't get to get rid of your student loans most of the time. You don't get to get rid of your taxes, and you will be taking care of your children. And that's the difference between the types of debt. And understanding that bankruptcy serves to deal with the lowest predatory type of debt, not the other type of debt, but the low predatory debt. That's when you start to understand why it's valuable and appropriate in an economy like ours.
I do want to go back to the student loan one, because the question whether student loans are predatory is another question altogether. But I thought that was kind of more on the myth side. The student loans could never be canceled out in bankruptcy. Is there a case where that does happen?
Yeah, absolutely. There's always a few little places where you've got some room. One thing that I can say is that student easier to navigate, negotiate almost always outside of a bankruptcy. So for example, federal student loans, you can get service years, you can, there's a lot of different options. If you're on Social Security, they have programs that make them go away. So there are a lot of options available to people outside of bankruptcy. Inside bankruptcy, student loans are generally non-dischargeable as a flat rule. You can overcome that if you can show tremendous hardship, if you can show that you were paying them at a time when you could pay them, and you can show that you don't have the ability to pay them into the future. But most of the time that's going to fall under a disability situation, and we've already got a lane available for those people through the disability process. So I think that recently, over the past couple of years, this administration had directed the Department of Justice to make it a little bit easier to let these things go. But that was done by executive order, so I don't think we're going to have that anymore. So I think it's really important that students understand, what they're getting into when they're doing this. I just want to say the myths are that you won't be able to buy a house, live your life, get credit cards, ever be able to do anything. And the reality is that bankruptcy is what allows you to do those things once you've already fallen behind.
I think that's going to bring us nicely to our next section, which is like the consequences of it. And on the student sheets, it's like a pros cons list. So can we talk through like the pros of bankruptcy, and then maybe let's talk about the cons and what you can and cannot do afterwards?
Yeah, I mean, I think the pros far outweigh the cons, to be honest. I'm asked this question a lot, and it's actually hard for me sometimes to come up with the cons. I mean, the pros are that you are completely free from unsecured debt, and that is terrifying, dangerous debt that is overwhelming to adults, to anybody really. You get a fresh start. If you come into the bankruptcy process with a low credit score, filing bankruptcy actually pops it up. A lot of people don't realize that. It brings you to the floor is about 600. So if you've got a high score, you're going to come down to about 600. But if you had a high score and you're filing bankruptcy, you were robbing Peter to pay Paul. Your score is artificial. And everyone kind of ends up at 600 and then starts building from there. And it's a lot easier to build your credit score when you're starting with no debt, right? You have a lot of room to start move and then to start building wealth. If you've qualified for Chapter 7, you're debt-free in 4 or 5 months or less. And that's a tremendous advantage. If you're in a Chapter 13, you at least get to make sure that all of your important expenses are being paid first before your creditors are getting paid. That's not what happens when you're being garnished. That's not what happens with a debt settlement company. So the priority is making sure you are safe from your creditors while you either pay them back what you can afford or while their debts get discharged because you're under the income limit. That's pretty much how it works. The only cons that I truly believe that exist are, number one, the people who have higher scores their score will drop. Their score will drop a little bit, and so that will be temporary for them. And I really think that one of the biggest cons is that ongoing belief that somebody has about themselves that they have failed, like their own self-reflection, the stigma, the myths. I don't really believe those things need to be there, but I think most people would consider those as a con. But I see so many benefits. I've represented people. I just had somebody message me a couple of days ago, and this person, was at a point in their life where they wanted to not be here anymore. And they were worried about their wife. They were worried about the debt that they had, and they actually thought that, they thought that they could take matters into their own hands. And he came along and started talking to people and was able to pull back before he did anything. But debt is a shameful thing. We come to the table, and you guys are all still so young that you haven't really had to experience how shameful it can be when you can't pay for something. But it is a shameful thing that I'm trying to change, because debt is just money. It's just normal. It's no different than, talking about, the best way to cook something. You have to understand what's going on in order to help yourself. So we're going to take shame and embarrassment away from the debt. That's really what I think is the goal here. And that's one of the best pros. You move on with a great life after bankruptcy.
Okay, so like you think it's still possible to have a great life after bankruptcy, which I think some people might be like, oh, like this is rock bottom. Like I'm getting rid of some debt, but like I'm going to be untouchable for credit for however many years. Like, can someone actually buy a house or buy a car during that time if they don't have the cash for it? Because I feel like
that's absolutely, great question. I mean, yes, and this is where the myths are. Let me tell you realistically what my clients experience after when they file bankruptcy. My clients can buy a vehicle the day after we file bankruptcy, the next day. They can buy a vehicle the next day. My clients can have access to quality credit cards within a couple of weeks, couple of months. Definitely within about 3 months, they're going to have a decent quality card available to them. They can build their credit score back up to a 720 within about 12 to 18 months, oftentimes quicker. And they're going to be able to qualify to finance a home in 2 to 4 years. So the myths about what you can do after bankruptcy are wildly misunderstood. And when I say you can buy a car the next day, that's true. That's really the actual truth. People think, well, how can I do that? My credit score, I just filed a bankruptcy. And the reality is that once you file bankruptcy, you're signaling to the financial world that you're cleaning your finances up and you're ready to start moving forward. You've just gotten rid of all of this debt, and you can't get rid of any debt that you sign on after a bankruptcy until you file another bankruptcy, and you can't do that for 8 years. Most people aren't going to file another one. So everything you buy after you file a bankruptcy is going to be your responsibility, and lenders know that. They throw cars and credit cards at you because they know that you want to get back in the game. And the real issue is being thoughtful and building that up in a responsible way. But no, I mean, look, David Ramsey filed bankruptcy and he turned his life around. I think he's an amazing example. Walt Disney filed for bankruptcy. Henry Ford filed for bankruptcy. H.J. Hines filed for bankruptcy. That's Heinz Ketchup. That's Walt Disney. That's Ford Motor Company, right? These are prominent people. Bankruptcy is how you pick yourself out of the dirt, dust yourself off, and get back into the game. It doesn't end your life. It puts you back into it, because once you're in overwhelming debt, you're drowning. You're incapable of doing anything. You can't start that business. You can't build the American dream. Bankruptcy stops your world, flips your script, and says, all right, it's time to get back to the business of living. And that's kind of how it works.
So if we have, say, a Chapter 13 bankruptcy, which, reminder, this is the one where we are going to have a 5-year plan for paying off debts based on our income and the gap that we have. I'm assuming the assumption is that like every bit of spare change we have is going towards our debts, or is there still a gap allowed for things like saving for a home or buying a car? Or what happens if our income increases after the bankruptcy? Is that supposed to get now allocated towards the debt proportionally too?
Yeah, if you are in a Chapter 13 bankruptcy, everything in your life is drilled down to a budget. We have a complete budget for you: rent, utilities, food, home maintenance, car maintenance, your specific healthcare costs. What do the medicines in your household cost? What are your special needs? What is your mortgage versus what their mortgage is? We line item everything. And when we go through every expense, The leftover number is what you have to pay. So there's no line item expense for Christmas or birthdays or savings, okay? But every one of your needs is being met in that time. And if you're in a chapter 13, remember how I said you can maybe pay a little bit if you make a little bit over the income, or you might be paying a lot if you're a lot over the income. If you're in a chapter 13 and you get a windfall or an increase of income, we're going to look to see how much of it you were paying. If you were just paying a little bit, you're going to have to pay more. If you were already planning to pay it all off, you don't have to contribute additional monies to it. So it's really dependent on how much you owe and what your expenses are and what it is you're going to look like having to pay. But here's the thing to remember. You can't buy a house or save or do anything if you have debt. You're not going to be able to do those things anyway. You can't save while getting yourself out of $50,000 in debt. The goal is to get through the $50,000 so you can get to the other side and start robustly saving. And this is why bankruptcy is so important. Remember I said we're going to get this done in 5 years or less. Anything that takes more than 5 years is wasting those valuable earning years where you should be contributing to your retirement and starting that business and figuring out what your American dream is. What's it going to look like? You can't do those things with debt. So we got to get through it fast so you can get to the other side so you can go do it.
All right, I hope that's a pretty clear picture for you guys. I definitely learned a lot here about bankruptcy. I came into this not knowing a ton and not wanting to do a ton of research because I wanted to learn alongside you all and kind of ask the questions that I was getting curious about. So we're going to go into the Q&A section now. So students have given questions. If you are watching this live, feel free to put your questions in on YouTube and we will see them pop up here and we can answer them for you. If you're watching the replay, you are also still welcome to put your questions into the comment section and we will get in there to answer those for you whenever we can. But I have some ready for you, Adrienne, from my students.
Yep.
So one that I think came up from Murphy was, how often does this happen? Like, is this a common thing, less common thing? Like we know, like you said, there's this shame around it. People kind of keep their cards close to their chest when this happens. So like we never really get to know how many people around us have done this. Do you have any idea of the numbers?
That's a great question. I could look up the numbers right now. I'm thinking it's somewhere between, I think it's somewhere between 600,000 and 1 million people file per year, something like that. But what I do know is that in your classroom alone, somebody in your classroom has a family member who has filed for bankruptcy. It is a very quiet thing. It is something people are very, very reluctant to talk about. I've represented people for 28 years, and it's pretty clear to me that, I know they don't tell anybody, but I also know how many people I meet with every week, right? I live in a small rural town in Ohio, and for the last 25 years, I've had 10 clients a week, right? And so it is pervasive. I have filed bankruptcy for teachers in my kids' schools, for bankers at our bank, for Department of Homeland Security. I've just filed I can't go anywhere without seeing somebody I filed bankruptcy for. And so you may not know that people are filing, but a lot of people are filing, and those numbers are going up right now. And I would say to you that it's largely because we have a very predatory consumer lending system in the United States. Over the years, we've been removing usury laws that used to protect all of us from lenders. And because those have been removed, this debt is getting more dangerous and easier to slide into. And that's why bankruptcies are increasing. It's also why understanding why people are filing bankruptcy and how they're getting into this trouble is part of the conversation with this predatory debt that's unregulated.
That's why it was so important to include this conversation in our personal finance experience. Like it goes along with all of the things where it comes to understanding debt and credit and making good financial decisions. You can't rely on someone else to put guardrails up for you and keep you safe. You also have to do the work yourself and become educated yourself and share that with those who are less fortunate that didn't get this class.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay, I've got another question for you. Lily wants to know, does bankruptcy happen like very quickly, or is it spread out over a long period of time? Okay. And I would say, let's talk from two sides of that. How long does it take someone realize, I'm in trouble, to filing bankruptcy? And then once you file, how long is that actual process to get through the courts and get a Chapter 7 or Chapter 13 or told, no, you don't qualify?
Yeah, I think Most people wait too long to talk to a bankruptcy lawyer. Every person who's ever filed bankruptcy pretty much says they wish that they had spoken to somebody sooner. So I think that once you start to realize that you have a financial problem, you're going to either do one of two things. You're either going to go start to find all the information you can find to try to figure out what your options are. You're going to be open about it. You're going to figure it out, and you're going to make your way to a bankruptcy lawyer at some point in time. Or you're going to be so embarrassed and shameful, and that's most people, that you're going to be quiet about it and you're going to just keep trying to find a solution. And the reality is, like I touched on earlier, there are not very many safe ways to get out of bankruptcy. The safest way to do it is to budget your way out. But if you can't budget, the next safest thing to do is to file bankruptcy, not to borrow from a 401k, not to borrow from a home equity line of credit, not to take out a consolidation loan, not to go with debt settlement. What does that leave? That leaves inheriting money, winning the lottery, or, becoming the next Jeff Bezos or something. And I don't think we're all going to do that, right? So the most important thing here is that most people don't realize that they need to be looking at bankruptcy earlier, and they double down on the problems. You see, bankruptcy is going to protect usually the equity in your home and all of your retirement. So you never want to take from your retirement or your home equity to pay that type of debt we talk about, credit cards, medical bills, personal loans, without talking to a bankruptcy lawyer first. So in answer to Lily's question, a lot of people go try other things that aren't working, and their problems become even worse. And then so when they finally make their way to a lawyer, they're really desperate. The process itself, if you come to me today, I could file a bankruptcy for you tomorrow. But what's going to stand in your way is all of the paperwork you're going to have to fill out for me and paying me. And that's usually the hardest thing. People have to pay for a bankruptcy. And I think that's the most confusing part.
Rachel wants to know, how much is the cost to file bankruptcy? I thought this was a great question because,
yeah,
I got no money, so how am I supposed to pay you?
It's funny. When I was in law school, I was interning for a federal bankruptcy judge. And I only chose to intern for the federal bankruptcy judge because it was federal and it sounded fancy. Okay, because I had another opportunity in a local court. It didn't sound as fancy. So I chose the bankruptcy one, not knowing anything about bankruptcy. And I went, my first day, you could have picked my jaw up off the ground. Even as a law student, I didn't know you had to pay for bankruptcy, right? So I get that question, I do. But I think the reality here is that when we're talking about bankruptcy, we're talking about different categories of people. You can be very poor living in a homeless shelter, and that is a different level of need. That is you're in a different place in life than a single mom with 2 kids who's fallen behind on her credit cards, but has a job and is able to stay current on the rent and stuff, right? So those two people are going to have it's going to be harder for them to one's going to be really hard to come up with money. The other one's going to be a little bit easier. We also have high earners, high earners filing. But a bankruptcy is going to cost, a Chapter 7 bankruptcy will cost somewhere between $1,500 and $3,000, maybe $3,500, depending on where you are in the country. I charge $2,100, but that also includes about $450 in costs and expenses that are paid to the bankruptcy court, that type of stuff. There's a couple of things that I do want to say too, though, is that a lot of times when you talk to a bankruptcy lawyer, they tell you to stop paying on the credit cards. And that's how you start to gather the money for the bankruptcy, right? So when you stop paying on something, you can divert those funds, number one. Number two, tax refund. Tax refund time is a very popular time for me. I'm very busy during tax refund because that's a great time to pay for a bankruptcy. Most people who get a tax refund are usually getting just a little bit, not enough to pay off all their debt. And so they take that tax refund and pay just a little, keep everybody at bay a little bit, but then, it never really solves their problem. And if you have enough money in your tax refund to file for bankruptcy, that solves all your problems. There are a couple of free or reduced cost options. There's a website called upsolve, upsolve.org. upsolve.org. They help people file for bankruptcy without a lawyer. They're a not-for-profit agency. You had to be single and you can't own real estate. But the other thing that I would want to remind everybody is that there are an organization called the Legal Aid Society. There's legal aid societies around the United States in major cities. Some are more well-funded than others. And so like in Toledo, an hour away, the wait is 6 months. So you can get on their schedules now. Some are better than others in terms of what they have to offer. But those are a couple of good things to look at.
All right, we got some great advice, and I appreciate your transparency too. It's always nice when we just hear a number like, okay, this is what I expect. Plus that tip around like, when does unexpected money come in, or kind of expected, like tax refund time is a great time to say, okay, I've got a small lump to work with. What's the best way to utilize this money to help my goals or solve my problems? And filing for bankruptcy would be the one.
I mean, it's all about figuring out what you can do with what you've got. If you get a $5,000 tax refund, but you owe $38,000 in medical bills, your $5,000 tax refund isn't going to go very far, and it's going to get squandered if you don't use it in your best interest, right? If you can pay $2,100 to me, and then you have almost $3,000 left, you can buy things for your kids. You can get them clothes for the spring. I mean, we can buy food. You can buy that big boy bed that you need. I mean, these are real things. And when we're talking about the cost of a bankruptcy, I mean, what is it worth to you, right? Like if my client has $45,000 in medical bills and they're drowning and they're just not getting, it's going to become it's like the most important thing they can do is find $2,100 so they can get rid of that, because they're basically buying a $2,100 lottery ticket that's guaranteed to pay off their debt. It's crazy that you have to pay for bankruptcy, but then again, it's crazy that it's so cheap. If you think about it, for $2,100, I'm getting rid of all my debt. If I qualify, if I'm under the limit, that I don't think you get a better return.
That's a great personal finance way of looking at it. Like, what is the return on investment for your money? And it sounds like a lot of money, but again, what you can get back or pay off, and not even adding the quality of life improvement that can come from getting rid of that stress from off your shoulders. The
mental health benefits, the relationships, marriages are struggling because of money. I mean, getting this taken care of can oftentimes, suck some of the misery out of the relationship and kind of give people a little bit different perspective. So.
All right. Well, thank you for answering our questions. So I'm going to ask you one question I ask every guest who comes on, and that is, what is your number one piece of advice for teens when it comes to building wealth?
My number one piece of advice for teens is to start saving early. I mean, I'm sure that's probably what a lot of people say. Start saving early and often, even if it's just a little bit. Understanding and getting into the habit and the discipline of paying yourself first and seeing how important your future is. It is just simply saving and investing as early as possible. Thanks to the compounding interest, money is going to grow exponentially over time. And a small amount saved today can become a huge amount in just 15 years. And if you're at 18 years old, you start investing today, you'll have money at 30. You might have, you can have money at 30 to buy a house, start a business, do those things. And the sooner you start, the better it works.
Yeah. And like the sooner you start, you make it automatic, you take it off the top of your paycheck before it ever gets to you. Like, you will never miss it. You'll learn to live without it. And you start that habit now, it is going to be life-changing for you. I'm a very messy money person. I think it's why I love what I do, because I do really understand my clients pretty well. And the one thing that I did was I was disciplined enough in my very first job. I just contributed the max, and I never looked back. I never looked to see what it would be if I wasn't contributing the max to my retirement. And I'm really glad at the age of 53 I've done that, because I would have just squandered that money away on stupid stuff along the way, because I've squandered a lot of money on stupid stuff, that's for sure. But I would have done it in this situation, and that's why it's so important just to do it automatically. I wish somebody would force everybody to do it. Yeah, because I started my job not knowing anything about personal finance, and I did not start by contributing the max. And once you start getting used to the salary you have, your life adjusts to it, inflates to that number, and it becomes very hard then to pare it back to say, okay, well, now I'm going to go max out my retirement benefits. It's very hard to do that.
It gets even harder after you turn 50 and you've got the catch-up provisions.
For sure.
I'm here to tell you.
Let's find
That's
out.
way in the future for your students. Let's let them enjoy their youth.
True that. Let's find out the answer to our trivia question and see how you did, Adrienne.
Okay.
All right, let's revisit it. All right, what did you say?
I said 100.
Ooh, not bad, not bad. So 180 yards is the recommended amount of floss that everyone's supposed to use, which at the average cost of, I think it was 10 cents per yard, that's $18 you're expected to spend every year on just flossing teeth.
Interesting.
Did you know that? I'm guessing you didn't. But if you were the closest to it without going over, congratulations. You're really good at trivia.
Hey.
All right. So, Adrienne, before we leave, can you tell us a little bit more about where people can find you? Because part of the reason we do this is I want to introduce students to as many different voices in the personal finance community as possible who are sharing awesome information about how to manage your money. And you should be continuing this learning journey after you leave your personal finance class. And part of the way you can do that is by following content creators online who are putting out great information, such as Adrienne. So where can we find you?
Thank you. My primary platform is TikTok. So I'm at The Ladylike Lawyer. At The Ladylike Lawyer. I'm on TikTok. I'm on Instagram. I'm starting to make my way to YouTube. I'm on Facebook, but that's for the old people. So come find me on TikTok. I also have a website, www.theladylikelawyer.com. I'm actually really fun to follow. I don't cuss very much. I'm age appropriate to the most part. I have a lot of my kids' friends who follow me, so I'm pretty lighthearted. I would welcome you to follow me.
You're real. You're easy to watch. There's entertainment with good information in there too. It's exactly the kind of person that I think a lot of people do like to follow because there is that education that's not boring and dry. Like it has some entertainment value to it, or it's easy to listen to as well. So definitely highly recommend whatever platform you're on, give Adrienne a follow and just continue to learn. Let it be part of your day, that when you scroll through that news feed, there is some personal finance information popping up there for you. Huh. All right, Adrienne, thank you so much for joining us today. I hope all of you watching got something out of this. Please do leave a comment and let us know what you thought. And we'll see you next time we've got a couple of great ones coming up, actually. We have Aaron Thomas, who's going to be joining us for prenup. So that other legal side of things before marriage.
I love Aaron. I know Aaron. He's great. You guys are going to love him.
We have Bernadette Joy is going to be talking to us about leveling up our resumes.
Perfect.
Megan McGuire talking to us about student loans. We've got, let's see. Those are the big ones that are coming up. We've got some.
You guys have some good. Your boy Rob went out into the world and he captured all these amazing people to bring back to you. Good job, because you're bringing in some good content for these students. I'm not saying that about me, but I'm just saying I'm hearing the people that you're bringing in. You made some good connections, and that's going to bring some great content to your kids. This is wonderful.
Well, thank you very much. So yeah, if you are enjoying the content, you want to see more content like this, please make sure you hit the subscribe button and also the like button so it keeps popping up on your YouTube feed. Thank you all for joining us today, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks a lot.